Got it.
We're here with Senator Street of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And Senator, if we could just start with the most recent news, which is you announcing the formation of your exploratory committee toward a U.S. Senate bid, sir. What was the immediate response to that?
Well, it was great. I said I wasn't gonna create an exploratory committee unless I had at least 100 of Pennsylvania's top leaders from around the state. We announced with well over 120, and the list grows every day, including my leader, whip and appropriations chair in the state Senate, Congressman Evans, Congressman Brady, and a host of leaders from labor, from organized labor to clergy, to business people to activists across the Commonwealth, it was a good launch. And now we've got a lot of work to do to talk to all the people of Pennsylvania and build out an agenda that is really people focused.
Well, I want to get to that agenda. And in the meantime, as part of it, of course, earlier this year, you put forward bipartisan legislation to legalize marijuana in the state of Pennsylvania. And I'd like to ask you about that. Democratic Governor Wolf has said he would sign marijuana legalization into law, and yet you do have a Republican-controlled legislature. What do you need to get the support of your colleagues? You start with one of your Republican colleagues in support of the bill, but what do the two of you need to do to get there, to get a majority in the legislature?
Well, the first thing is that I think we've cleared the hardest hurdle, which is you have to have a bipartisan bill. In Pennsylvania, Republicans control the House and the Senate, but don't have enough votes to pass anything without the governor's signature. And Democrats have the governor, but don't have the House or the Senate. So in Pennsylvania, in order to make law, it has to be bipartisan. In this case, Senator Laughlin and I worked on it together, and I think we've built some real bipartisan consensus around this bill. Now, we're going to have to do work to get members to actually sign on. There's a lot of education that has to happen. What we do know is that the majority of Republicans and Democrats support the legalization of recreational cannabis.
Right.
What we do know is that it's economically good for the state in terms of tax revenue, but it's also good in terms of expanding our hospitality industry, expanding our business for small farmers, because we have a lot of farmers in state, and it is overall good for the economy. And the other thing is we'll save money on criminal justice, which is both a moral imperative and an economic thing. While marijuana usage is roughly the same between Black folks, white folks, Latinos, and others, Black and brown people are 4 to 5 times more likely to encounter criminal justice, the criminal justice system, as a result of cannabis use than our white counterparts who are using it roughly the same level. And that's that. If we can't enforce the laws equally, we shouldn't have it. So this bill would do away with the need for prosecuting and the criminal justice system chasing after people for cannabis, which, quite frankly, most people think is a waste of resources. Moreover, it costs $42,000 to incarcerate somebody, and even if a person only spends 6 months, that's $21,000. And so, we would eliminate that, and then additionally, we would expunge or seal the records of every person who's ever been convicted of a cannabis crime. And so there's so many people who may have, when they were young, been convicted of a cannabis crime, and now are older and are limited in their employment opportunities because they have what's considered a drug felony. And so this bill does a number of things. We have social equity licenses so that those communities most targeted with cannabis enforcement will have an opportunity to participate. And we made sure we have micro grower processor licenses so our smaller farmers can also get engaged in the process. So we really did think this thing through. I think we've developed a piece of legislation that can garner the support needed. And additionally, we made it very clear that the cannabis is for people 21 and older, and that you run the risk of forfeiting your license if you provide cannabis to anyone under 21. which would be a fairly severe penalty.
Senator, there's a lot there. And certainly as you go forward, the devil will be in the details as you negotiate with your Republican colleagues. Uh, just a few questions based on what we've observed in New Jersey. First of all, would you favor examining a constitutional amendment to dedicate monies from marijuana revenue to impoverished communities and communities that are particularly impacted by the whole war on drugs? And that's one. Two, you mentioned expunged or sealed, and certainly that is a very specific area, because expungement, and we went through this whole debate in New Jersey, but expungement is very different from sealed. Expunged means vaporized, and that is a record that the person no longer has to worry about who's committed a nonviolent offense in the past, versus sealed, which law enforcement might still have access to, which a potential employer conceivably could have access to. That's another sticking point. So is it expungement or is it sealed? And the last question I would have is parental notification, because that was a sticking point in New Jersey. Initially, we had a bill that did not require law enforcement to notify the parents of 18-year-olds caught with pot. They later went back and corrected that. Could you comment on those three aspects?
Well, the first thing is we dealt with the reason I said expunged and sealed. Sealed would be a function of the bill and law. The governor, by an act of the General Assembly and the governor's pen, we can seal the records of everyone. We can create the right to expungement, but that in Pennsylvania is a judicial process. So the legislature and the governor can't unilaterally expunge anything. We would then need the court to take an action. The concern was in the past, we passed clean slate legislation that said everyone could have their records expunged, but you still had to get a lawyer, pay for a lawyer to file a petition to have your records expunged. For people who don't have the resources to do that, we wanted to make sure that there was some relief for them immediately without them having to spend money. And so as the legislature and the executive branch can seal the records without judicial action, and then we can create a right to an expungement that you then would have to go. So what happens is when the bill passes, everybody's records are sealed. If you wanted to take the extra step to get your record expunged, we create a right to do that, but you have to go through the courts to get your record expunged. Separation of powers won't allow us to take judicial power through statute. So that's the first. That's why I said expunged and sealed. It's really sharp that you caught that. Most folks don't, but it is. You're right. There is a significant difference. But one of the big differences is we can't expunge. We can only create a right to expungement. It takes a judicial action. We can seal. So that's why we worded it that way. Second part of your question. What was it about?
A constitutional amendment that would.
Constitutional amendment. So we're not really proposing going to a constitutional amendment, in part because that would delay it by years in Pennsylvania. We have, in order to amend our constitution, we have to pass a bill in 2 successive sessions. It has to be identical. If it's amended at all, it starts over. Right. So the soonest you can, it takes 2 to 3 years statutorily to amend the Pennsylvania Constitution. There's no way around that, or at least it's very difficult to get around. So a constitutional amendment would push this back years. So we did dedicate the money to, we do propose dedicating the money, a lot of it to programs to affect disaffected communities, but we do that statutorily because to do it constitutionally would be a multi-year process in Pennsylvania. It would require an act of the General Assembly. And then it would go on the ballot, have to be notified. Notice would have to be sent out by the Secretary of State's office. Then it would have to be a public referendum. And then we would have to do the whole thing again in a different session. And a legislative session lasts 2 years. So we would do all that this year. Then we'd have to wait till 2023. And then we would have to have an act of the General Assembly. And then we'd have to have notice by the Secretary of State. And then another legislative referendum. It's very difficult to change Pennsylvania's constitution. And so we're dealing with several constitutional amendments for other things. And whether Democrats or Republicans want constitutional amendments, they take years and they usually don't go through because it's so complicated. For instance, we're in the process of trying to amend our Constitution to protect the rights, to give additional relief to sexual assault victims who were victimized in their childhood, particularly in response to all the priests that victimized children,
Sure.
as well as the children that were victimized at Penn State University by Sandusky. And that process is taking years. And because the advertisement was done wrong, now it's going to take even longer. And so we as Democrats have also proposed a legislative solution there, although I fully support the constitutional amendment because we want to make sure enshrine that. The victims are very upset that it's going to take years for us to complete a constitutional amendment process. In that space, because of the sort of overarching thing, I think it's worth going through the process. But I also believe, that's why I've supported legislative relief to get them relief quicker. In cannabis, I think once we pass a law, it'll be good. I don't think we have to worry about going back and this being enshrined in the Constitution. And I don't think anybody in the cannabis space wants us to kick this can down to potentially 2023, 2024. So that's what we're doing. And in the final part, we were really strict and very clear that it was that you had to be over 21 to purchase cannabis. I don't know that we have looked at the issue, and certainly I would be willing to support notification for people, parental notification. Parental notification to people over 18 and below 21 is an interesting question. I don't know what the constitutionality around that is, right. Because I know in the case of colleges, the students have to actually sign in order for there to be parental notification of anything. Once you turn 18, you're an adult. That would be an interesting question. I certainly support it in concept. Getting it done, I have to look at the constitutionality of sending notifications to people's parents after they've reached the age of majority.
Senator, Lieutenant Governor Fetterman has long advocated for the legalization of cannabis, and he's actually set up an application process toward a pardon. I don't know the details of that. I actually tried to click onto it on the website, and it said the page was broken. I don't know what that's about. Maybe it was just a temporary glitch. But do you favor a pardon as a temporary measure while the legislature is having this debate?
Well, absolutely. One, I want to thank the Lieutenant Governor for being a big supporter of my legislation. I've been I first introduced cannabis legislation before he was Lieutenant Governor. But when he got there, he jumped on board and has been a big supporter of my legislation. So I thank him for his jumping on board and trying to be helpful. And the second thing, I've long been a supporter of expanded use of the pardons process. Problem is the pardons process is the pardons board is understaffed, and that process is a slow and cumbersome process. In order to get pardons or come to all of the people who need who have cannabis records, that would probably take years, and that's if the computer system worked. Yeah. And so, while I think it's a good, every measure that helps is good, I think we need to get the legislation done so we can en masse seal all those records and then have an expungement process where all of the full breadth of court systems, all of the 67 different county courts of common pleas can move forward with expunging all of those records, as opposed to trying to have a very small pardons board do it. But look, it is a step in the right direction. I certainly support those efforts.
Sir, I'd like to pivot back a little bit toward your U.S. Senate campaign. Last year, Joe Biden, then candidate for President Joe Biden, advocated decriminalization, and he talked about legalization of marijuana as a state's issue. Would you, as a U.S. Senator, favor making it the law of the land and trying to establish federal legislation legalizing marijuana in all 50 states?
Well, certainly I would, but I think as an intermediate step, the federal government should immediately deschedule cannabis from Schedule 1 and should remove it, either reschedule or deschedule. And the reason for that is this. You have people right now in over 37 states that have some form of legalization, including Pennsylvania, where we have a recreational program. who purchase cannabis and can't, and are medical patients and can't use insurance. So let's say you have a low-income child, could be a rural child in a small farm, could be an urban child in the inner city, and that child has epilepsy and is suffering from seizures. There are many children who suffer from seizures, and the only medicine that can stop the seizures is cannabis. And right now, that family would have to pay out of pocket a price that could be cost prohibitive, or could literally make them choose between other essential choices and whether a child has seizures, because it is federally illegal for insurance companies to pay out. And even if the insurance company is noble and wants to do the right thing, federal government's standing in the way. And so we should immediately, and I would introduce legislation and support legislation to immediately either deschedule or reschedule cannabis, so that we can allow banking, we can allow insurance, and that people who are cannabis patients can have access. Now, ultimately, cannabis prohibition should end nationwide. I don't know that the Congress is anywhere near ready to do that, but I do think that a rational argument can be made that there's no reason that we shouldn't immediately deschedule and then allow, in places where it's legal in states, for cannabis use. The other thing that's a little silly is this. Let's assume in Pennsylvania you have a dispensary, you're a cannabis patient, right over in Philadelphia near the Ben Franklin Bridge on one side of the bridge, and you could purchase a tincture of cannabis and for your medical purposes, and that's legal. And you're like me, you have in-laws in South Jersey, and right on the other side of the bridge, let's say in Camden County, there's another dispensary that serves the same thing. Well, right now, that you're with your cannabis card, it's legal for you to have it in Pennsylvania, it's legal for you to have it in New Jersey, but if my relatives from New Jersey drive to Pennsylvania, they've committed a crime with it, and if my relatives from Pennsylvania drive to New Jersey, it's a crime, even though it is legal in both Pennsylvania and New Jersey because of federal law. That's just almost like creating traps for people, because if I know it's legal in Pennsylvania and I know it's legal in New Jersey, who would think that it's illegal to take it from New Jersey to Pennsylvania or Pennsylvania to New Jersey? And so as a consequence, we're just creating traps for people, and most likely who's going to get caught in those traps? People of color, who are more likely to face law enforcement. So we should deschedule immediately at the federal level. I will support that. I will fight for that. I think with working with the president, we can get that done. And then over the long haul, I think ultimately we should just legalize. We should create a federal regime for legalization nationwide.
Senator, I'd like to also bring the issue back to one of your main issues, which is green jobs and the economy, and actually fostering the economy. You've sort of nailed that down as your most prioritized concern in this early incipient U.S. Senate campaign, and you've talked, as you've discussed, cannabis farming as an issue, and really enabling a greater access to being able to farm this. Could you talk about legalization of cannabis in that specific context as a jobs creator and as a means of furthering that agenda you have of creating a better green economy in Pennsylvania?
Well, certainly, yeah. Well, I think that's a great topic, and I'm glad you asked me the question. First of all, my alternative energies portfolio standards bill goes a long way to expand access to renewables and to make our traditional energy a lot cleaner through carbon capture and other technologies and the use of biosolids. But the other thing is cannabis can be used as a building material. And if you were to, and industrial hemp, which I helped push through a legalization of industrial hemp at the state level, industrial hemp, which is a form of cannabis, a low THC form of cannabis, when grown, if you make concrete out of it, it's called hempcrete, and you use it in building materials, you have now sequestered carbon. It's an actual carbon negative process, because the hemp, when it grows, pulls carbon out of the air. And then when it's used as a building material, you've permanently sequestered it as a part of that building. That means you're storing carbon. You pulled it out of the air and using it to make buildings, using it to make roads, using it to make things that last. And that's actually not only is it reducing not only not expanding our carbon footprint, we're actually eliminating carbon. We're actually making the world, we're actually reversing the process of global warming. And in doing that, we're helping make the world better. I mean, and it sounds a little hokey when you say it, but it's just true. We all know climate change is an existential threat. This is one of the ways, by using biosolids, and hemp is a biosolid as a building material, we're actually reversing global warming. And that's been important. The other way we've done that is by a robust hardwoods program. Pennsylvania has miles and miles of trees, and by having the right kind of hardwoods and using wood in building materials, you're also sequestering carbon. But hemp grows so fast, and because you can make actual concrete out of it, you can make bigger structures using hempcrete than you could out of wood.
Well, sir, I really appreciate your time today, and I would like to ask you if there's anything within this conversation that you feel we haven't discussed that you'd like to add.
Look, I want to say this. There are a lot of folks who, when they run for office, have big visions and big dreams, and everyone should. I certainly do. But one of the things I think that distinguishes me is I've learned to be practical, to make sure we use, when we're suggesting things, there is both the science supports being able to get it done, and then that we come up with real practical political solutions for implementing it. Because the average person sitting out there wants to know that elected officials' plans can actually be implemented, and so that we can have an effect on improving their quality of life. Because if other than that, we're just talking.
Right.
So I've always characterized myself as more of a pragmatist than anything else, because at the end of the day, when you represent constituents that truly need real change to happen, not just talk, I like to think of myself as a guy who actually knows how to get things done.
Senator, I'd like to ask you this last question, and that is, we have a trust gap in the country. So many people just don't believe that elected officials or that our system is actually producing the public interest as its first priority. And the fact that you took the time to put together a bipartisan piece of legislation takes us a critical step, I think. And yet there's also that nagging distrust of the two-party system. And so Democrats and Republicans like it, but what about that mass of mass constituency out there still doubtful, thinking that, well, this gives the government potentially $1 billion a year, and maybe they're just going to create more government with this. You talk about pragmatism. How do you ensure that the ultimate goal of legalizing marijuana is pragmatic and public service priority?
First thing we can do is by doing it. So we crafted a piece of legislation that has a real pragmatic approach to getting this done. There will be reductions in the size of government, because we won't be in our criminal justice system alone, just because we won't have to process and prosecute and store and supervise so many people who are convicted of cannabis crimes. That's the first thing. The second thing is we've worked to make sure that these resources are used in a productive way. And right now, quite frankly, most people who are looking at things, the expanding government's really not an option. We have a huge, but the pandemic has caused big financial problems. And so I think the biggest concern is that we find sources of revenue that don't cause us to have to take more money out of regular people's pockets, that we don't have to raise taxes, that we don't have to hit our small businesses again. And I believe that cannabis, with, like you said, somewhere between 600 million and $1 billion of new revenue, that goes a long way of not having to raise people's taxes, not have to, there are homeowners who said, I can't pay any more property taxes all across the state. There are folks in cities like Philadelphia, where we have a wage tax that say the wage tax is a job killer. So what we're doing now is finding a way to have the revenue to provide for education, to provide for fixing the streets, to provide for the basic services people need in a way that grows our economy, without, as opposed to something that is shrinking our economy. And in the process of doing it, it makes our justice system more fair, and both fair to people of color who are disproportionately targeted for enforcement, and fair to medical patients who need it, because overall recreational legalization will drive down the cost of cannabis and make it more affordable for everyone.
Senator Sharif Street, co-prime sponsor of a cannabis legalization bill and a candidate for the United States Senate in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Thank you so much for your time today, sir. Thank you for a substantive conversation, and I look forward to more of these, and hopefully the next one we can do is in person.
Absolutely. I hope so. But in the meantime, continue to be safe. Thank you so much. Stay safe. God
Thank you,
bless.
sir. You too. All the best.